This is the Allura Code, a transmission for creators, sensitives, and visionaries who know they're built for more, who can feel the signal beneath the noise. Here we decode the hidden patterns running your life, the ones shaping your wealth, your relationships, your body, your art. It blends human design, field energetics, ancient tech, and quantum energetic architecture to recalibrate your system back to truth. You will learn to tune into your body, recognize what truth feels like, and use that as your guidance. This is a multidimensional approach to allow the whole of your being to come together in a convergence of self-discovery and alignment so that you may begin live from full alignment and press play on life. This isn't self-help, it's self-remembrance. Each episode is a map, a key, a mirror. If you dare to meet the real you beneath the programming, welcome home to the Allura Code.
Welcome to another episode. I've got with me a good friend of mine, Rafina Bukas. Oh shit, it's Bacchus, right? Okay, take two. And welcome to another episode of the Allura Code podcast. With me today is my good friend, Rafina Bacchus, and we are going to talk today about the usual kind of stuff that we talk about on this show, things to do with expansion, spirituality, energy, consciousness, etc. And so Rafina's been on a journey for a very, very long time, and I think she's got quite a lot of wonderful things to offer. So without any further ado, Rafina?
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on your podcast. I love the initiative and I love just serving everyone and sharing with the community out there.
Well, that is great to hear. So maybe we can start off by maybe just tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing, what you do, and how it's, and I mean both in terms of your spiritual initiatives and also what you do career-wise, and how there's been some overlaps in the two. And just, and just something that comes to mind. I mean, we don't need a whole chronological whatever, but just things that kind of, come top of mind.
So, in terms of what I do out in the world, for a career, I'm a lawyer and a mediator and adjudicator. And I also am an adjunct professor. And the way that all ties in with my spiritual work is I've been working with various forms. I've been in this spiritual community for about 20 years and working with various tools to tap more into my inner knowing as well as energy work. I find that the two tie in together really well so that, what once was sort of like, intellectualized work has now become more of a flow for me in the way that I function on a day to day.
Okay. So in terms of how that affects things for you on a day-to-day, maybe just kind of walk me through that a little bit.
So, for example, if I'm in a mediation and I'm the mediator, I will read the file. I understand what's being alleged and pled. I understand the legal issues. But then when I'm in the room with the parties, I will tap into their energy. And sometimes I can shift things energetically by being in the room with them. And so when I'm tapping into them, I'm able to kind of understand what's going on beneath what they're saying, like beneath the surface, and help them get to a resolution that they're really looking for, because sometimes they may say certain things, but I'm feeling into what they're actually looking for. And so this awareness is helping me with my ability as a mediator, for example.
Okay, and so I guess it's been about a month now since we did that initial scan. And if I remember that, one of the biggest things that came up in the scan for you was, I mean, up until this point, I mean, I know you've been doing the adjudicating and so on for about 3 years now, and you've sat on, what was it, like 700 cases in 3 years, which is freaking amazing. And there was, and the reason I bring this up was because in the scan, it was calling for you to adopt more of that sort of more present, receptive side of yourself, because, for however, 20 odd years that you've been in law, you've been relying more on your natural sort of logical, kind of analytical, kind of arguing side, which is an absolutely perfect textbook fit for being, in the kind of law that you've practiced. Because you mentioned initially you were at a firm for 12 years.
Yeah, yeah, good memory. Yeah. So I did litigation, which was very adversarial for 12 years. And then, about 3 years ago, I switched over to adjudicating, which, like we discussed, I think requires that you're more in, as they say, you're feminine. But by being in your feminine, that doesn't mean being passive, right? It means being in your power still, but it's functioning in a different way than we've been socialized to do, like in Western society. It's tapping into your intuition and finding your voice to not say what the ego wants you to say necessarily. So what, you might come up at the surface, but it's about like going deeper within and getting to what's actually the truth, like the heart of what's going on. And then having the courage to say that to the parties to get to, some sort of agreement. If, for example, you're working on a mediation.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it really has to do with, because I remember there was a case that you had mentioned, whereby, I mean, you can fill in the details, but there was a woman who was working for this company, and I forget what kind of company it was, but there was some kind of something that they were working on, and somehow it wound up on your desk because that she was like Catholic or something, and then the work that they were
Yeah.
asking her to do, she
She felt like it impeded on her, it violated on her right to religion, her creed, because a lot of it was a non for profit sector, and a lot of the education was for, the LBGTQ community. The LBGTQ community, and she felt that it went against her creed.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, at face value, like that's like a very interesting position to take in today's world, right? To come in and say that because I had to have training on a marginalized group, I felt like that was imposing on my creed. And the organization serves, all different types of marginalized communities. So, she didn't have a very strong case. And she was looking for a huge amount, like let's say she was looking for $100,000 to try to resolve a case that if it were to have gone to a hearing, she probably would have gotten nothing. And regardless of how much I said to her about like the rational reasons for why she should settle for, a nominal amount just to get something in her pocket and move on with her life, she said, no, I don't care. I'd rather go to a hearing and lose. It's based on the principle. And if I had been approaching it from like, that like intellectual or like logical stance, I would have just left it there and said, you know what, fine, go to hearing, you're unreasonable. But what I was able to do was kind of tap into what she was really looking for from the situation. And then when I was in the room with the CEO of the respondent, I got a sense of how they were as well. So I came up with a resolution where I said to the CEO, would you be open to hearing from her directly? Because I think all she needs is to be heard in this moment. And if she feels like she's actually being listened to, I think this will change everything for her. So the CEO was like, okay, you know what? I'm willing to do that. And I could sense that the CEO was a very compassionate person. So I trusted that she would listen, like with her heart open. So the respondent came in and she said what she had to say. And she just said, basically, she felt ignored because of her request based on her creed. And she felt like other groups were getting prioritized over her. And when she was able to say that piece, I got her back into her room and she then agreed to essentially walk away from her case.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing how having an open mind and actually being able to tune into your God-given resources and the way things would pan out. Because did it look like from the outset that could have even been an option based on her, on the claims that she was making or the stance that she was taking?
No, 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 no. Like she was really hard set on a very high amount and she was very upset. She was very argumentative with me, very closed off. And so, the natural route when you're dealing with someone like that, with, that sort of position, is to say, okay, they're unreasonable, they're irrational. Let's just shut this down and end it here. But, I had to be able to kind of like see past her position, which in my mind was also, to be honest with you, unreasonable, and get to what was actually going on for her. And I also had to be able to like tap into what was going on in the other room because, say, for example, I had a CEO who wouldn't have been able to hold space for her. It wouldn't have worked out. It would have just inflamed the whole situation and made it worse. So, that's the beauty of being able to like do this kind of work. You're able to kind of like tap into what's going on behind the scenes, bring people together, and you're in the moment, right? So you like when I'm doing the work, I'm really present. And a lot of people like will say to me, not in work, but just in my day-to-day life, like, oh, everything flows for you all the time. Like did you actually do like the preparation? Some people are really stuck in research mode where they're worrying. And so they have to be really like prepared before they do anything. They'll like, say, for example, they're buying a new appliance. They'll like research 50 of them. Right. And then get lost in that over analysis of it. For me, I wouldn't say that I don't do any research whatsoever. I'm informed and I have some guidance, but then when I'm in the moment, I'm also like relying on what's happening in that moment, right? To make a decision.
And that's the key because, personality types are going to be personality types. So, if you're the kind of person that that enjoys doing research and being prepared, like I know, like for example, in real estate, when I'm getting ready to do an offer, I need to know exactly, I need to know exactly what's going on in regarding that particular property in that neighborhood, in that building, or whatever the property is. And I also need to know exactly what's going on with, whichever side of the transaction that I'm on, whether I'm representing the seller or whether I'm representing the buyer. It's the same thing. So, because well, first of all, you have a legal obligation to represent their best interests, but also for me, it's just, I just feel a lot more, you feel a lot more confident going in when you've done your homework. And I often find that, depending on the stance of the other party, taking that centered, calm, grounded approach moving forward is often your best bet. Because what's happening energetically is, and I know you can attest to this, is that you can do the research, but it's what you might call, you're doing it intuitively. Because even though you're still doing an activity which is more of the masculine persuasion or of a left brain type of activity, when you're including the other side, it becomes much more of an embodied experience. And it becomes, for lack of a better term, it becomes a little bit more channeled. So when you're actually presenting the information, you're doing it in such a way that is very cohesive, that is very clear, that is very grounded, and that is very rooted in signal. And by doing that, you're then creating an experience, because the other person that you're working with, especially if you're leading by example, the other party is, they're gonna be able to, well, the idea being is that they're going to be able to tune into that resonance, and and you're going to be able to create this flow. And I just find that, when I approach doing things like that, whether it's in my personal life or in business, it just, it just offers for a much more, I'll share a quick story. So this was about a month ago. So actually 2 months ago, I got a call, and this woman she was interested in seeing a property. So I phoned her up, and we had a good old chat, and she was lovely, just very easy to talk to. And so we booked a couple of properties to go see the following day. Went and looked, and right off the bat, within 20 minutes of being in the first place, I was really able to get a sense of where she's at. Now, I didn't know the cause of of the reasons, but I was just able to pick up on it. So if this had been me, say 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have pushed a little harder. But I just let it be. And then a week went by, I heard from her again. There was a couple more places that she wanted to go see. So same sort of thing. I could tell that she was curious, but also very apprehensive. And I mean, you have the conversations about this, that, and everything that you need to talk about. But I could tell that, like, I knew that there was something going on behind the scenes. And it was the same sort of thing. And it had to do with the place that she was currently living in. And she'd been living there for like 13 years. And, she was very attached to it and everything that it represented. So this was something that we needed, that was going to be a workaround.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we went and looked at those places the second time again. There was this whole push-pull kind of dynamic going on. And then she said, okay, well, I'm going to be out of town for a couple of weeks, and we'll touch base in September. At that point, I was kind of like, well, either she'll do it, or either she'll move forward, or she won't. And I didn't have it was kind of how do I explain this? I wasn't going to put any more time into it unless she came to me. Anyway, fast forward 3 weeks, she called me up. There was one place that she wanted to see. It was a nice place. It was in her building, and it had the same view that she did, and it was a bigger layout. So we went and looked at it, and at the time of the appointment, which was 1 o'clock, there was no dire sense of urgency. And so we closed the meeting. I said, do we need to have your discussions with your team, and let me know what you want to do. Anyway, about 3 hours later, I get a notification that there was another offer registered on the property. And so I messaged her, and I told her, I said, look, this is the situation. I explained to her how it could go. And she said, okay, give me a couple hours. So she got back to me. I had everything ready. So I was a little bit surprised, but it was also interesting that the way that the situation had been structured, it was like push comes to shove. It was basically putting her in a situation where she had to make a decision, because she'd had a fair bit of time to do so. So now it's like, okay, either do it or not do it. So anyway, so she got back to me. She's like, all right, let's do it. She was at work the whole time, and she works at a place that has live events. And so she had to keep running into like the storeroom and stuff to take my calls, so I could do what I needed to do. Thank God for like DocuSign and stuff. Anyway, long story short, it was a little bit chaotic, but it just flowed, the conversations that I was having back and forth with the other agent. And long story short, we got it.
Yeah.
And that was it. And it closed 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's like the motto that I live for. It within in my life, just because I've been practicing this for so long. So it's not to say that I don't prepare, right? I do, but I also have a lot of confidence when I'm going into situations to surrender to that situation, and work with it, as opposed to necessarily being really rigid about certain things, because it throws off the energy, or being anxious or having a certain opinion about the way things need to go. I'm not saying that you're going to be like passive. No, you're not. You're a co-creator in that situation, right? But you're present in that moment. So when you're in that moment, you realize what needs to be said, how things need to be said, right? Whereas if you're too married to an idea before you go into a situation, it could sometimes throw off your flow. And so it's really like a balance of, yeah, of course, being prepared, but also like allowing yourself to surrender to that moment and work with what's happening in that moment.
Yeah, and I think you can even go further in that to say it's just like, the way that you kind of govern your life is going to be indicative of of the type of results that you get. So, and you've just, you've made that, very evident that, that's just kind of the way that things go. So now in terms of how you kind of worked your way into this knowingness, like how did that all start? Where did that come from?
Well, as you know, I have, a legal background, right? So law school is very much about learning a new way of thinking. It's about being over prepared. It's about knowing every case, every, detail of every case, every fact. So you're spending hours and hours and hours in the office preparing before you go into a court. And so that's my background. And that's the way I functioned. And then I started doing the meditation, which was teaching me to do the opposite, right? Which was like, oh, just surrender and go with the flow. And so I would say, like, through years of experience and trial and error, I've come to this balance in my life right now. I had moments where I was like, oh, should I trust my logic or should I trust my intuition in this moment? And now I'm at a stage where my logic and intuition are both tools that I use, right? So if my intuition is pointing me in a direction, then I'll also fact checked it, right? To make sure that the facts align with what my intuition is pointing me towards. Or if logically I think this is the right decision, I'll also tap to my intuition and feel into that decision. And then I combine the two together, and that's the direction that I head in now.
Okay. And so now, I mean, this isn't something that happened by sheer luck. I mean, this is something that he worked at for years and years and years and years. So maybe just talk a little bit about that part of the journey. And I'm talking about the sahaja, I'm talking about the yoga and that whole the like the cultivating of the energetic structure.
Yeah, so I started my energy work doing Kundalini yoga through a group called Sahaj Yoga. And so we did a lot of work with chakras and Kundalini and energy. And so it was very highly energy focused and tapping into your own energy and working with other people's energy. And, I taught with that group for many years and did, many retreats around the world with them. And then from there, I did my yoga teacher training in Bali, and I did it with an organization called East Meets West because I found that the Kundalini stuff that I was doing was absolutely fantastic, but it was very Eastern based. And I had a hard time living in the Western world with a lot of those Eastern philosophies. So, right there, I'm thinking to myself, how do I bridge this, right? Like East meets West. It's almost like logic meets intuition, law meets yoga. It's the same thing. And so that was one of my ways of trying to bring it together. And then I've done a lot of different techniques and taught many different things over the years, right? So I've done, Shivananda. I've done basically I've tried many things, and I'm I'm at the stage now where I am using tools, but I'm not part of any sort of like group
Mhm.
anymore at this stage. Oh yeah, I was in Kadampa for a long time too, which is Buddhism.
Mhm.
And it's very similar to Kundalini. They
Mhm.
just use different terminology, but
Okay.
the teachings are essentially the same, just
Mhm.
different terminology. And I've taken away a lot from each of these different experiences that I've had, to the point where now, yeah, I just keep refining and refining and refining. And do I think I've arrived? No. Like when you're doing this work, I don't think you ever actually arrive, but it's always about being really, like boldly honest with yourself. Like for me, I think I like to say, like, I'd rather the harsh truth than a soft lie. And so that's what I always do with myself, and just keep refining so that I'm more able to be happy and joyful, and be present in the world.
Okay.
Hmm.
And so what was over the course of that journey? I mean, it's still ongoing. What was, or what were the maybe top two or three moments uh that were the most, not the, okay, so not so much the experience itself, but more the, for lack of a better term, the lesson that came out of whatever the experience was.
So what were my top three lessons?
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So for me, learning to, it wasn't so much about understanding how to surrender, but it was understanding the fact that surrender isn't a, it's not a linear, it's not a linear process, and it can go in stages. And
Surrendering is a really tough one. And I think, yeah, I agree with you. I think it takes many years and many different approaches to understand what surrendering is. Everyone talks about, okay, you need to surrender, right? And like, okay, what is surrender? Does
what
that
does that
mean
even
like
mean?
give up hope? Like I'm just gonna lie down and let what happens to me? No, right? But that's what when you first practice it, you have a certain understanding of it. And then as you keep practicing it, you get different understandings, like different layers
Mm,
of understanding what surrender is.
mm,
So surrender is still you having your agency, but it also means like working with the moment to be okay with what's happening in the moment as well,
mm,
right? And responding to what's happening in the moment without necessarily forcing like your preset ideas about what should be happening in that moment. And understanding that maybe what's happening in the moment could be working out for you,
mm,
right? But the problem that a lot of yogis have, and a lot of people that are, a lot of people that are newer to this work, is that they think surrender means that you totally, right, go with the flow in the moment. You totally say, okay, well, I saw 111, so that means I should be doing this, right? Surrender doesn't mean totally giving up your mind. Okay. So if common sense would dictate a certain decision, you can't completely surrender and go against it. Sometimes you might, sometimes you do that. And I think it takes discernment to be able to know when to do that. So, like, discernment works hand in hand with surrender. And discernment is also not a linear concept, like, discernment also takes so much, like, practice to get. Discernment requires an inner knowing. So you've got to be, that's where you come back to this concept of being, completely harshly truthful with yourself about what's going on within you, right? Because to have discernment doesn't mean to be judgmental, right? So sometimes you might mistake judgment with discernment. It's not the same. Discernment really requires that you understand yourself, you trust yourself, and you're using that trust in yourself to make your decisions. And then when you apply your discernment to a situation, that's when you realize, okay, what is surrendering in this moment? What does that look like and mean for me?
mm. Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases it's getting away from, it's getting beyond the label and actually yeah, like taking stock of what's actually happening in the moment and saying, okay, and kind of getting into that expanded kind of heartfelt feeling where, things start to, things become a little bit more nuanced. Let me give you an example. So there was an audio that I was listening to. I can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before, and she was talking about I can't even remember the subject of what the video was talking about, but there was this one point where she came, and this kind of actually ties back into this, this thing about, you know, having, you can have an idea of what you want. You can envision like an outcome in terms of the, of the situation or whatever it is you're working towards, but also being open to say, well, okay, the universe is infinitely smarter than just me. So I'm going to stay open and say, okay, well, maybe there's, and there's things that I haven't considered yet. And so, and so when you actually make a choice, what automatically happens is the polar opposite comes up. And so you have these two opposing, or what would seem as opposing forces. And there's this what's called the fulcrum point. It's like in drumming, when you're holding a drumstick, there's a point of balance where you hold the stick about a quarter of the way up, and so you can bounce it off of the drum, and make it do one time or two times or whatever have you, right? So it's finding that point in between and honoring that flow of infinity between the two of them. Because what happens, the reason why this happens is because we live in a dualistic universe. So everything has its opposite. So you can't have just one thing with the other aspect of it. And the thing is that both of these seemingly opposite things or bodies of energy or thought processes or whatever you want to call them, are actually part of the same thing. So, and this is where people run into trouble, is that they're feeling this, the side they want to feel, and this part isn't present. But then when this part becomes present, they think, this is where conditioning and anxiety and worry and judgment and all these other jobs of the ego kick in, because they think that it's separate. But if we actually realize that they're all part of the same thing, and we're riding this fulcrum point, or the point of neutrality in between the two, so for lack of a better term, it's about, when this side comes up, it's creating a space for it to be there, and you acknowledge it and you feel it, you have a beer with it, whatever the case may be. So you stop fighting it.
Yeah.
And this is, and the thing is that the more you fight it,
what we resist persists.
And there's this book that I'm reading, and it was called, you know what, the name of the book is drawing a blank, and the author he's an MD and a PhD in psychiatry or psychology or something, but he's got a very, very cutting edge look at the way he does his work, because he understands these deeper concepts, he understands these deeper truths. And he was talking about a woman who was I can't remember what the situation was, but she was in complete denial about something. And so after working together for a while, it came out that her mother had passed away 22 years prior, and that she had not come to terms with her mother's death, and just all these hosts of repression and guilt and shame, and all these, basically this huge thing of denial in terms of what her mother meant to her, because her mother had basically waited on her hand and foot her entire life, and it had created, I think it had something to do with the fact that she was a hoarder and she was hanging on to every single memory. And she had never learned how to let, and it was, it was literally ruining her life. Like, she was,
This is the mom?
no, the mom was past, 22 was past.
The
This was
daughter.
the daughter.
Murder.
Yeah, this was the daughter.
Oh.
And it was, and basically they went through all this.
Yeah.
It turned out that it was because the daughter had never accepted her mother's death and was absolutely petrified about being on her own. And it had just, and this is, and basically 22 years of complete denial. And
Wow.
and this is what it had turned into. So it was
That's unbelievable.
it was a complete freaking thing, right?
Yeah.
So
that's unbelievable.
yeah, and there's literally millions and millions and millions of these cases. I remember another story that I read. It was about this woman who was, if you look at her on the outside, she looked like she had it all together. She owned a media agency, and she was always working, really busy, making lots of money. She was very talkative and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then she'd work 10, 12, 14 hours a day sometimes. And she'd been doing this for a while. It hadn't been just on she's basically living on coffee and cigarettes and Red Bull, right?
Wow.
And she was aware that she needed to slow down, but she just couldn't, because she was afraid that if she stopped, that the whole thing was going to fall apart. But the irony was that the cracks were starting to show, because she'd been burning the candle at both ends for so many years. And what happened, see, the thing is that, and this is what came out in her sessions, was that it wasn't about the it wasn't about fearing that if she stopped, whether it was going to fall apart.
Yeah.
It was because she'd experienced slowdown in the past, and it was what came. Because
When she slowed down.
as soon as you stop,
Yeah.
everything that you've been ignoring and repressing and putting down and denying for so many years, they start coming up to the surface, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing is, though, is that when we experience something this is my understanding of it based on my own experience. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm just the Allura code guy. Is that when we experience some sort of sensation, that, especially something that doesn't feel good.
Mhm.
So the feeling like when you're kind of like, yeah, you feel kind of like agitated or whatever, like you got the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
What's actually happening is your nervous system in the process of expanding to create more capacity to hold more charge, right? And by doing this, what actually happens is it's like when they make maple syrup, right? They need like 20 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And so they boil it,
Mhm.
and they're just boiling off the impurities. So that's exactly what's happening here whenever something comes up in awareness. And yeah, you can be like, "Arr, arr, arr," but whatever, you allow it to come through and
How do you allow it to come through? That's the hardest part, right?
practice.
And that's where, like you said, someone was a hoarder for 20 odd years because they didn't want it to allow it to come through. It's like
Well, they weren't even in a position to understand that was even a thing, right?
Exactly, because it's so deeply repressed that you may not even know that it's there.
Exactly.
Okay. So how do we get to this stage where we're now allowing it to come through? Like that's the question, right? And a lot of it, I think, requires stillness and going back to that concept that I keep referring to, which is like ruthless honesty with yourself, right? Like your mind is very clever. And so it's going to find ways to protect you, right? It thinks it's protecting you from these things that need to come up. And so it might be through work, like you said, with that other person. It might be through hoarding, like it was with that person. But if you're not even aware that that's what's going on, like, it's very interesting. And for me, what I found that works is like just that honesty with myself, where I spend a lot of time in stillness, and I really keep going deeper and deeper into what's really going on here. like what's really happening here with me. And, of course, using external tools too, right? Like therapy, reading, friends, not overly relying on them. But yeah, I think that's really a big part of the human experience is to sit with it and allow it to come up and then face whatever it is so that you can expand.
Well, I mean, exactly, and that's what this whole thing is about, is, people, well, for starters, like, I mean, people getting to the point where they've, because people don't go to, typically don't start investigating into a spiritual journey until they get, until there's, so there was, there's been something happening for many years now, and we can call it the, like, it's kind of it's kind of like a restlessness, and it really got exacerbated during COVID.
Mm.
And I mean, this has been building for probably, I mean, years, but
Decades.
yeah, but it's really it really started to become,
Mass.
yeah, like a mass consciousness kind of awareness.
During COVID. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was really what, but I mean,
During the
it really, I
lockdowns.
mean, I first really started to feel it probably back in like 94.
Yeah.
And but there's also, it's also like an evolutionary piece. So I mean, if you were to go back 1,000 years, and so say it's the year 1000, and what was the scene like back then? Well, the scene back then was that the priests, church, were the populace's connection to God. And so they had no sense of inner awareness. They had no sense of like having a personal relationship with source or anything like that. They trusted, open-heartedly, that these priests were acting in their best interests, and that the messages, like if there was a big storm or the crops failed, the priest would say, well, it's God's will, or it was the work of the devil.
Yeah.
It was pretty black and white, and they never questioned it, because that was the order of the day. That was the authority. But as time went on, they started to realize that these priests were taking dives. They were getting payoffs, and there was a lot of, they were corrupt. And fast forward, 300, 400, 500 years. So now we're in like the 1600s, and now it's the beginning of the scientific method. So now we're saying, okay, well, but the original, you know, so we're saying, screw the priests. We want to have our own personal connection. And we feel like by now we can put a bit of faith in the scientific method to be able to, you know, have a little bit more discernment. And when we can, because science is based on fact. But as we have progressed to where we are now, that whole question, with which drove this entire expansion of technology, both in terms of industrial, uh, scientific technology, scientific inquiry, scientific study, the explosion of quantum physics, in the early part of the 1900s. They've really lost sight of what the whole purpose was, and it really started to focus on a very kind of a materialistic aspect. And so now we're at a point where that unsettled feeling is has become much more, it's just way more noticeable now. And there's a whole other bunch of reasons why. We can save that for another conversation. But basically, we've got all this awareness and all this knowledge and all this technology and all this everything that we have. And the focus is getting clicks. The focus is on profit. The focus is, I mean, and it's unfortunate. So we as people who are on this path, you know, the where the rubber meets the road is again is that fulcrum point, is that neutrality point. So is that we learn to hold space for when these types of experiences come up. Because if you just watch the news for 5 seconds today, you know, it doesn't matter whether you watch, you know, something on the right or something on the left. It's so polarizing.
Yeah.
And people are just like, I mean, you read some of the comments and some videos on social media and stuff, and it's like people are full on at war for no, and they don't even know why.
So what's your take on that? Like with what's going on in the world right now, how do you think, like, what do you think as a person who's, working on energy and, being connected to source, let's say, would you think that we should be watching the news or not watching the news? Like, how involved should we be in what's going on in the world right now in terms of politics and the polarity and the divisiveness? Because if you're putting your attention on it, it arguably would create more of it.
So
If you take your attention away from it and you put your attention on something else, then arguably you're actually expanding the light. But are you spiritually bypassing by not doing that?
So I think it's for myself, I like to, I like to test my nervous system's capacity to hold space. And so every now and then I'll just turn on the news and, like listening to news radio, it's typically, I mean, they're very, very quick, short segments and there's no video.
Yeah.
But when you watch it with video, I'm curious as to how my system is going to react, because then it's interesting. And it's kind of a game that I like to play whereby I will, I'll start watching something and I will see how, if the signal holds neutral or if I feel some sort of an activation in my system. And then once I feel the activation, then that's my cue to really, you know, really buckle down. And now, because now I've really got to expand the intensity of my focus to stay neutral and to stay present, because it's so easy to slip into unconsciousness and then start to identify with these different types of things. So
Yeah.
I don't make a point of doing it often, just because
It's too triggering.
it's just it's I do not want to be unconscious, because
It'll pull you in, you think?
oh, it does. And then, I mean, it's great practice to catch yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but there are much more productive and gentler and nurturing and expansive ways of doing it than, watching people argue over, or reading comments on people arguing over, something that that a politician said, or that, something like that. So
Yeah. I mean, I stopped watching the news, I don't know, like 20 years ago. And I work in human rights. I'm an adjudicator in human rights. And people will say, hey, did you read that big case about what happened in the US on this human rights matter? And I'm like, no, I didn't. And they're like, oh my God, like, do you live under a rock? And I said,
yeah.
no, I don't. But yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I know what I need to know, right? But I need to kind of like have my boundaries about what I let in, right? And so sometimes I will watch it for informative purposes, but yeah.
So yeah, that's really the crux of it. I mean, from an energetic perspective, it's like, I kind of touched on this just before.
Yeah.
There's just this massive disruption, the breaking down of old signals.
So I'm gonna ask you another question that ties into it, because
Sure.
this comes up a lot with people too, where they're saying, like there's this whole like debate within the community about Trump and whether he's actually like this light worker or not, or like where do you sit when it comes to all of that?
So he is a disruptor. He is here to shake things up because, let's face it, the world has been running by a certain playbook for more or less thousands of years, especially in the last 100 or so. And it's to shake things up because he's very outspoken. He doesn't give a flying F about anything. And
But what about the fact that he's arguably like homophobic, racist, sexist?
yeah, so again, from an energetic perspective,
Yeah.
he's a disruptor. So it's bringing, it's bringing these kinds of topics more out into the open, and it's more in your face because it's waking people, it's getting people to actually clarify what's important. Instead of worrying about what color they're going to paint the bathroom, when your freedom is now suddenly being threatened, it's a completely different conversation. It's getting people, the way I see it anyway, is that it's getting people to, to prioritize what's important.
I think someone was telling me with like the QAnon community, he's supposed to be like implanted as like the important person who's going to change everything. I don't know if anyone follows that, but yeah, I don't. I was just told a little bit about it. When I think about archetypes, because I like to think about things in terms of archetypes, to me he's like the trickster archetype. So it's like this archetype that comes in and it through illusions and tricks, it's showing us what's in the shadows, and it's bringing the shadows to light so that we can actually, it's exposing them so we can face them. So, like you could say, okay, he's causing divisiveness, but, those issues were already there, right? That's why he was voted in. That's why, people believe in him. And, I think going to what you're saying, Rob, is he's exposing what is the rod underneath through this sort of trickster archetype. Have you thought about the trickster archetype before? And do you see the connection there?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and you see the parallel, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of podcasts that I've occasionally tune into.
Yeah.
That are very kind of out there sort of types of things. And
like I wouldn't say he's a good guy, but he's a necessary tool to bring the shadow up.
Well, it goes back to what we talked about last week, which was that
it's unfortunate that we need it. And I think that's what a lot of people are upset about.
Yeah, but this is unfortunately at the stage of evolution that we're at, if we were to zoom out and we were just like, if we took a look at this, it's funny that this comes up now. So I had a really interesting experience on Friday night. And I've had over the years, I've had countless times where I've been able to transcend my body, and I've just been able to feel a sense of just pure, basically being able to collapse the physical aspect of my body and get to into such a state. But this time it was different because while I was still, I was still aware of everything, but I got this vision of myself just observing myself doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
And just, for the, and I mean, I've done this in meditation and, you kind of understand it intellectually, but this time around it was a lot different because it was, it was so much more profound. And I had the opportunity to look at things from a more of an eternal lens because that is, you know, I mean, that is what we're here to experience.
Yeah, I think.
And that's the whole point of this journey is to bring us back to remember who we are and that, we're not quote unquote, that we're not just humans having a human experience, but we're actually these energetic entities that
Are having a human experience.
exactly. And we're doing this for the purpose of expansion.
And I think what I was going to say is when you have those kind of experiences, a lot of what we're talking about, you understand, right? But the thing is, when you have those kind of experiences, it's all in that moment, it all makes sense. You're like connected to source. Everything is like, oh, I see it all. But because you're a parent, right? But then you come back into your body, let's say, for lack of a better term. And then, what happens is your awareness comes back down here or here or here. And that's where the work begins, right? That's where you're pulling up what's been suppressed and repressed so that you can continue to be here all the time, right? As opposed to, okay, I'm having this transcendental experience in meditation, I'm here. And then, constantly trying to be there all the time through, escapism, right? The point is, you can have these experiences so that when you are in your conscious day-to-day life, you're able to maintain a higher, awareness level.
Yeah, you're creating more bandwidth because you're burning off the illusion that you're because if you look at it like our body is just an extension of our field and it's just condensed in a physical form but it's not we know this we've known this for decades that it's just a series it's energy holding a certain form it's because everything is held together by a variety of electromagnetic fields depending on the density, right?
Yeah.
Even that crystal,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So, is it saying anything?
Is it saying anything to you? Let's see.
All right, let's see what it's saying.
Okay, let's do that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hang on a second.
Okay. Oh, that was really fun. Okay. So Rob asked me to tune into what the crystal is saying on behalf of the collective viewers who are watching today, right? Okay. So light, um, like acceptance and keep going, like expansion, keep going, keep going. Just allowing it, allowing all of the expansion. You're supported. Like trust, trust the journey, trust the expansion, just trust, have trust. And magnetism. So, as this expansion is happening, it's going to increase your magnetism.
Okay. And so I also decided to see what the crystal was saying, but I did it because it's her crystal, so I also have to tune into it, but it's it's a different kind of thing. So I used my trusty tarot deck, and so I pulled 5 cards, and I'm not going to go through all the cards individually because we would be here till Christmas. But basically, the overall energy is the spread hums with a temporary disconnect, feeling a little outside the flow, abandoned by source or support. But the crystal whispers, this is the refinement chamber. The sense of scarcity is only the echo of detachment. So remember how I talked about this and being at that fulcrum point? It's just that what it's saying is the part here which is present right now.
And that you are supported.
Yeah. So the outcome, alchemy, integration, the crystal is literally showing a refusion. The elements blending back into coherence. Temperance is the promise that when the extremes are acknowledged and balanced, mind versus heart, control versus surrender, scarcity versus flow, a new harmonic field forms.
And that's where we have the magnetism.
Exactly. The stone is recalibrating the frequency through contrast.
And so what I was feeling when I was saying, like, allow it was exactly that. Like, as the expansion is happening, there will be resistance that you'll feel. And it's to just allow it to, allow it to continue and have trust, which will allow you to kind of like dissipate that resistance so that there's more of that harmony.
Yeah. And so just out of curiosity, I just pulled what the next card would be. And it's basically saying that this is a very active period in time. It's no time to be passive. It's no time to, hide in your room and stuff like that. It's about, having real conversations with people. Um, you know, you know, maybe you've got something to say. I mean, I know I certainly do, and that's why I decided to do this podcast and why I specifically wanted Rafina to be on it is because she's got something to say. And and she's got her little buddy there. I think his name is Rick. I could be wrong, but yeah, it's there's lots to be done. There's lots of support. If you have questions, please write them in the comments or send me a DM, and I'll be happy to continue this conversation. Anyway, Rafina, do you have any final words?
Yeah, no, just to add to what Rob was saying, like I definitely felt that as well, where it's like keep going means to exactly that, like not hide anymore, whether that's whatever that means for you, right? Like hiding means so many different things, right? Like not hiding in your room, like Rob said, which is a great analogy for it. And now's the time in your life to come out and let yourself be seen and heard and expand and expressed.
Okay. Well, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's
It's
gonna
for dinner.
It's very much time for dinner. So anyway, Rafina, thank you so much. It was lovely having you on the show. And for you guys, we'll see you in the next episode.
Okay. Have a good night.
All right, bye.
Bye.